Yep. Got it. Got it.
So welcome everybody to session 2 of We Are From Spirit. And we're, again, thank you, Dr. Goldin, for taking your time out and presenting this amazing presentation. So over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. And so for those that might not have been able to get in on this particular seminar, just realize that you can click onto it at a later date. It'll probably take a few days to get on as a recorded one and see it at your leisure. So, okay, so we're going to start. I'm going to do the share screen now. Okay, so here we are. I don't actually see people here. I only see the screen. So can everybody see the PowerPoint?
No.
Why not?
Because we could before.
Okay. Okay, share screen, just that. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. All right. So we'll start at the beginning here now. So this is a series of seminars based on We Are All From Spirit, and it's complex concepts on consciousness and manifestation simplified. And the first seminar, which was last week, was on the Theosophy of how life manifests. Today, we are doing higher consciousness and human being. And then next week, we continue on with how to understand and interpret some of these higher consciousness, spiritual, metaphysical, or transpersonal experiences versus psychotic. And finally, the fourth session is people that have these different experiences, the effects and transformations from them, and the power of love. So these 4 seminars are sequential. They do go in sequence, but they also overlap. And by the time we finish the 4th one, we've kind of gone full circle back to seminar 1. So I'm just going to move that there. Okay. So today is higher consciousness and human being. We have 3 parts in this. Part 1 is models of consciousness. Part 2 is logos and spiritual energy. And then part 3 is a summary and conclusions. And it's a fairly big summary and conclusions. So part 1, models of consciousness. And here we are comparing models of consciousness in relation to our sense of self living in this wonderful world. So it's about perception, the ability to see, hear, become aware, know, understand, analyze ourselves, analyze others, and the world and life. So it's about spiritual development. So before we start, I just want to do a quick review from seminar 1, the Theosophy of how life manifests. So what I said in a nutshell from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is how life manifests. So from Supreme Source, on this mottled background, which shows potential of life, Supreme Source, pure consciousness, this goes to the I am, the being, the pure witness, evolves from that. Supreme Source shines its light onto consciousness, and pure witness can see itself, and it can see consciousness reflected from Supreme Source. And then we finally go down to the ego sense of self, which is just our human mind and body. So just to reiterate other words and phrases that describe and depict Supreme Source, it is also called pure consciousness, universal consciousness, love and bliss. It's called the mind, the all, wisdom. It is pure awareness and pure being. It is the unmanifest, potential, source of life, light and matter. It is beyond existence and non-existence. It's also referred to as the void, uncaused, unvarying. Non-duality and reality with a capital R here, and the capital R represents primordial reality versus the consciousness that you and I are in right now, which is a secondary or reflected consciousness. So Supreme Source, there is no cognition there. It's all about just the all and wisdom and knowing. There is no time and no space, and it knows no beginning or end. So 1 and 2, Supreme Source and the I Am, this is pure consciousness, non-dual. And 3 and 4 and 5 are reflections. They are shadow states of consciousness. So in number 4, consciousness, the world and the universe comes into existence. And the number 5 is the human mind and brain. So that's a review from last week on pure consciousness. Now, today, looking at models of consciousness, we're going to look at 5. We're going to look at philosophical, psychological, and Eastern to start with. And then we are going to, just trying to move this down. Okay. And then we're going to look at the perennial philosophy and theosophical. And just to remind people or people that are new to theosophy, what theosophy is. It is the comparative study of religion, of religions, should be plural probably, philosophy and science. And the science includes chemistry, biology, physiology, psychology, mathematics. So theosophy is a comparative study of religion, philosophy, and science to investigate unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in humanity. So this is a lot about the unexplained laws of nature are often related to these states of consciousness, especially the higher states of consciousness and spirituality. And this theosophy is very similar to the psychology that I studied, which is called transpersonal psychology, higher states of consciousness and spirituality. Okay, so these models of consciousness are hierarchical, they are developmental and evolutionary. So they do go in from, say, like the beginning to the end, from the all to the fragmented. And this first one, which is a philosophy, is from Ken Wilber. And he, first of all, is a philosopher, but he also wrote an awful lot of books for psychology, especially transpersonal psychology. And his model is called the spectrum of consciousness. And then kind of his buddy, they did write things kind of opposing one another and together. Michael Washburn is a psychologist, and he developed the spiral model of development of consciousness. And finally, for representing the Eastern, this is from Alexander and colleagues, quite a few names in there. And this is states of consciousness. So this is from the Vedic science of consciousness. So now we are going to take a look at these three in comparison against one another. So we look at Ken Wilber's to start with, and we're going to look at the mind here. So he calls pure consciousness the mind with a capital M, and he describes it as unity. There's no duality split there. This pure consciousness is direct experience, and he says it's spaceless. And because it's spaceless, he said, thus it is infinite. And I really related to that. The spaceless, so it's infinite, and timeless, therefore, consequently, it's eternal. So that kind of made it a bit clearer for me how that could be. So that is the full state of consciousness, the pure consciousness. When we go down here, we're going to fragmented states of consciousness, not full pure consciousness. Here he talks about, Ken Wilber talks about the transpersonal bands. And these are glimpses of pure consciousness, psychic, subtle, and causal. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then further, a fragmented sense of self and consciousness is what he calls existential, existing in the world. And this is the person versus the environment. So self is felt as separate from other, where here self is not felt separate from other people, separate from the environment. So this is existential. A further fragmentation from the person here is the psyche, the mind versus the body. And the self-identity and consciousness is also often related to the ego, the mind, the ego sense of self. And if you split that down, fragment the ego even further, in our ego mind, our sense of self, we have the persona versus the shadow. Now, the persona is the good sense of self, our good side, and the shadow is our dark side, the stuff that we want to hide or deny, like I'm crabby, I'm impatient, and stuff like that. We kind of want to deny that, and so we identify more with the persona instead. So you can see that this is from mind. Further down here, it becomes a lot more fragmented. So that was Ken Wilber's. Now we're going to talk about Michael Washburn's, and he calls pure consciousness. He identifies it as a two-in-one self. So a little bit different from what Ken Wilber says. But later on, you'll see that they're just worded differently. They actually are congruent. And then he talks about transcendent consciousness, and this would relate to these transpersonal bands here. It's going down. And then he's got ordinary consciousness. And the ordinary consciousness would be the shadow, the ego, and the existential. That would relate to those three. So finally, we go over to the Eastern one, Alexander and colleagues, and they define ordinary consciousness in terms of waking, dreaming, and sleeping. That's our main ordinary consciousness. And then from there, there is the transcendent consciousness, so similar to here. And this is occasional transcendent experiences, occasional metaphysical, occasional spiritual experiences. From there, they talk about cosmic consciousness, and this subsumes the above states. So it includes transcendental consciousness at a deep level, along with ordinary consciousness. And going further up to refined consciousness, this is a continued refinement of perceptual and affective processes. Affective processes are emotional processes and emotional intelligence. So it's continued refinement of that and higher consciousness until finally in unity consciousness, which relates to pure consciousness and mind over here, there is full enlightenment. So at the bottom down here, these subsume the earlier ones, the fragmented ones. So now we're going to take a look at these a little bit more individually, just a little bit. Okay, if the screen will click down. Oh, okay. A couple more points here. Transpersonal means beyond, but including the personal mind. So again, it subsumes these earlier, more fragmented parts of the self. So just a few words on Ken Wilber's spectrum of consciousness to give a bit more meaning to it. He identifies mind as pure consciousness, and he says when a person is at the level of mind, with this capital N, M, they have direct experience of the I am, which we talked about last week, Nisargadatta Maharaja's The I Am in Pure Consciousness. So when a person is at the level of mind, they have the direct experience of the I am, and they recognize all objects and phenomenon as creations or projections onto consciousness. Well, this is consistent with last week as well. Wilber also says each person has a mind. This is the smaller ego mind, the lower mind, and has mind, the capital M, as innermost. And then he talks about the transpersonal bands. So the psychic level, he says, includes clairvoyance, precognition, and intuition. The subtle level goes beyond the psychic, where structures of the non-manifest are seen. And the causal level is where the formless non-manifest is shown. And next week, when we talk about these different spiritual experiences, I've got examples of these, of all of these, from my clients and from my participants in my PhD research, and also some of my own experiences that are of this higher consciousness. And it's really interesting. So Michael Washburn's two-in-one self, he says that the two-in-one self can be likened, or I say this, I interpreted it this, that the two-in-one self can be likened to Maharaja's from last week concept, where Maharaj is both in pure consciousness and manifested consciousness and realizes this. So he's the pure witness and the reflected witness. That's the two-in-one self. Alexander et al., they say pure consciousness is the most basic ground state of mental activity. It's not bound by any thoughts or perceptions. It is the mind that thinks, and consciousness is the storehouse of thoughts. Consciousness holds the thoughts. It's the Netflix screen. It's the screen that holds the thoughts and the experiences. It says consciousness is that which contains us all. So that was the philosophical, psychological, and Eastern. Now we're going to compare side by side the perennial philosophy and theosophical. And so this is mostly taken from Theosophy. So the perennial philosophy, and I will just remind you, I got this diagram from Pinterest. So the perennial philosophy is a perspective that views all the world's religious traditions as sharing a single metaphysical truth or origin from which all esoteric and exoteric knowledge and doctrine has grown. So this figure has got at the bottom, so I just numbered these, has got at the bottom this human being, and the first area is physical, but divided into two. And then the next level is astral, and you can see there's an astral body around, or a circle around the body here, representing the astral. The third area, which is divided into two, sorry, so 1, 2, 3. The fourth area and the fifth area are the mental. So it's divided into lower and higher. The sixth area is Buddhic, the seventh Atmic, the eighth Anupadaka, and then we've got Adi as the source and one. And so the constitution of man from Theosophy, they go from the densest to the most subtle body. So this is the densest down here. And they say that the physical dense body is flesh and bone down here versus number 2, a first invisible body or aura, which is an etheric double. And the astral here is related to the emotional body or aura, and the concrete mental, which is the lower, and the abstract mental, which is the higher mental. And number 6 is the Buddhic, and that's an intuitive or Buddhic body. So I put down here where the wisdom is. And number 7, the Atmic, is the Atmic volition spiritual, the spiritual will. And then number 8 up here is a monad or divine spark, the reflection from the Trinity of man. So that's how I related those. We are mostly going to be looking at the higher levels. So the constitution of man, and this is according to pseudo-psychology or pseudo-theosophy, and according to Theosophy. And we've got the authors here, taken from here. Okay, so what we're going to look at is mainly these things that I put in a green square. And the monad, they say, as pseudo-theosophy, is the pure spirit, the divine spark in man. And the Atma, that is the higher part of the individual soul, the force of spiritual will. The Buddhi, so this is the individual faculty and quality of spiritual intuition. So it's basically synonymous with intuition and higher intellect, and it works alongside the force of the spiritual will, which is Atma. And they say each person has their own Buddhi, their own Atma, and their own monad. The higher manas, they say, is the spiritual mind. They also call it the soul and the ego. And this is situated within the causal body, also known as the higher mental body and higher self. And the lower manas is a subtle vehicle in which the ego functions on the lower parts of the mental plane. more inclusive down to more fragmented. Now we compare this to Theosophy, and the Atma here is the higher self. So that's consistent. The Buddhi is the spiritual soul, the vehicle for radiation of the divine light of Atma. And they say the Atma plus Buddhi relates to the monad. So that's pretty consistent as well. And the manas, they say dual, like higher and lower manas. Duals, the higher is divine and immortal, and the lower is our personal everyday consciousness and is new each lifetime. We won't go into the rest down here, but if you review this later, you'll be able to pause the screen and review that yourself more. So the higher manas, this is the causal level, is where the formless non-manifest is shown, according to Ken Wilber. And the Buddhi intelligence, that's the reflection of the mind to know. Now we're going to look at how Theosophy explains these 7 cosmic planes. So we're taking a few different views of how these levels of consciousness and cosmic planes are. The Adi, we start at the top here. The Adi is the supreme, a divine plane not reached by human beings. So I'm relating this to the pure witness that we talked about last week. The Adi up here. The Anupadaka is a divine plane, home of the divine spark in human beings, the monad. Okay, and the monad means that which is born by transformation from something higher than itself. It also relates to the first differentiation on the plane of being. So I'm thinking that this is relating to the reflected witness that we talked about last week. The Atmic plane here, this is the spiritual plane of man's higher self, the higher will. And the Buddhic is the spiritual plane of intuition, and they've used the word love here as well. So intuition, love, and wisdom. And then the mental with the higher and lower subdivisions here. This plane bridges the spiritual at the higher with the personal at the lower, abstract and concrete. And the emotional, which is the astral here. And this is a personal plane that ranges from lower desires to high emotions. And finally, the physical, which is a personal plane of 2 subdivisions. So a dense one, perceivable by our 5 senses, sight, sound, etc., and an etheric one that is beyond these senses. So this is yet another way of relating to these sense of self and manifestation. We could summarize this as these cosmic planes can be understood in terms of states or levels of consciousness and ways of knowing, from higher spiritual to mental to emotional and physical perception. Got all these different ways of perceiving and knowing and understanding and analyzing. And more on this in terms of spiritual experiences in the next seminar. So that was the models of consciousness compared. Now we're going to go on to part 2, the logos and spiritual energy. So from that diagram, I wondered, like, what is this thing at the top that you talk about this, but what is this? And then I saw this down here and I thought, okay, this going all the way down here, I better explore this. What is this going straight down through the center? And Theosophy says this is logos, and that is the undivided Lord with supreme will. Logos is the creator, preserver, and dissolver, evolving a universe, maintaining it during its life period, and withdrawing it at the end. We talked about this last session too. And according to Blavatsky, In the beginning of this universe was the Logos, and the Logos was with the Absolute, and the Logos was the direct radiation from the Absolute. The same was in the beginning with the Absolute. All things in this universe have been emanated and evolved from the Logos, and nothing has existed here except through the Logos. In the Logos was divine life itself, and that life is the spiritual light in man. The light of the Logos shone through the darkness of the Absolute, and the Absolute remained entirely unaffected and unmoved thereby, being absoluteness itself. So just to remind you, we've seen this image before from Nisargadatta Maharaj, and he says, like a hole in the paper is both in the paper and yet not of paper. So is the supreme state in the very center of consciousness and yet beyond consciousness. So different ways of explaining this and saying this. So pure consciousness, which is divine source and supreme will, here at the top. And this is the Logos, representing the Logos. So the light of the Logos shone forth from the darkness of the Absolute, shone through. And the Logos was divine life itself. And it shone through that life. And that life is the spiritual light all the way down to man, shone all the way through here. And in ancient Greek philosophy and early Christian theology, Logos refers to the divine reason implicit in the cosmos, ordering it, giving it form and meaning. It is an eternal and unchanging truth present from the time of creation. So the first Logos, this is the universal principle, the one source of energy and power existing in the cosmos. It is the supreme source that shines its light to create manifestation. It is often depicted as a white potential point right there in a black circle. You'll see this especially in Blavatsky's writings. And a lot of this is taken from her. And the point within the circle has neither limit nor boundaries. And when the first Logos radiates through primordial and undifferentiated matter up here, there is as yet no action in chaos. And chaos can be explained as vast space, emptiness, and the void. So there's no change there as yet. Remember, we talked about the credit card and the credit card that's not activated? So there's no action there. You don't get any action until that credit card is activated. So let's see how that is done. So we have a first Logos and also a second Logos. And this first unmanifested Logos is simultaneous with a line drawn, I'm pointing to it, across the diameter of the center of the circle. And the first line or diameter is called the Mother Father. From it proceeds the second Logos, which contains in itself the third manifested word and becoming the world. So this represents the first Logos, this represents the second Logos. Logoi and Fohat. So the first Logos is already present, yet still unmanifested, potentially in the bosom of Father, Mother. The second is the abstract collectivity of creators or the builders of the universe. And the third Logos is the individualization of cosmic forces, of which Fohat is the animating principle, electrifying every atom into life. In the manifested universe, Fohat is the link between spirit and matter, subject and object. So another way Theosophy explains this is the first logos is the root of being, and the second logos is life and form, spirit and matter, and the third logos is universal mind and archetypes. Yet another way that Theosophy talks about this is the three logoi are the unmanifested Father, the semi-manifested Mother, and the universe. So I think it's good to have a variety of descriptions and definitions to help to understand what this is and how they work together in the sequence. Now here, the logos in life, and this quote here was taken by from an article by Charles Johnston 100 years ago from Theosophical Quarterly. And what Charles Johnston said is, if we consider the logos to be infinite wisdom and power and love immortal, we may hold that all life, guided, inspired, and ruled by the logos, has as its purpose to infuse into our hearts wisdom and love and power and immortality. Okay, but how does this work? Let's take a look. Let's consider pure consciousness to the ego sense of self. So pure consciousness, sometimes it's helpful to remind ourselves of these different descriptions: source energy, supreme, pure being, essence of reality, pure awareness, universal and unity consciousness, and mind. So pure consciousness needs a vehicle and an instrument for its manifestation, because this is more passive. Okay, when life, faux hat, I put in brackets, produces another body, another individual, like a perceiver like you and me, comes into being. And I relate this to the pure witness going to the reflected witness. From pure consciousness needing a vehicle and an instrument, the pure witness looks into reflected consciousness and sees life there and can see itself as a reflected witness, takes on that role and lives life in reflected consciousness, which is our world. So source energy flows through the layers or levels of consciousness, including the Atmic, higher will, and the Buddhic intuition, through to the physical person's mind and brain. Flows down that way. And human beings often focus on the physical and lower states of consciousness, forgetting that they are spiritual beings living a human life. But human beings are actually the outer leading edge of manifested creation. So we are an extension of source energy in this time-space reality. And spiritual development includes becoming aware of our holistic self and these different states of consciousness. So again, I just put this along the side here, how the logos is infinite wisdom and power, and it can come all the way down through our human being sense of self. Okay, now what Theosophy says about spirit and soul. Spirit, and this was taken largely from Nisargadatta Maharaj. So Theosophy quotes, "Spirit is who and what you really are, your real self, your essential nature, the highermost part of your being. Spirit is impersonal," he says, "it's formless and not an individualized thing. There is not a different spirit for each person, because spirit is one and shines over all, just as our one sun shines over everybody on this earth." So he says that my spirit is the same as your spirit. So there's no such thing as my spirit or your spirit, because spirit knows no separateness. It is literally one and the same in essence and identity as the Supreme Spirit, the Supreme Self. This gets more interesting. Just as a multitude of sparks are sent forth from a blazing fire, so countless sparks of the one supreme spirit are sent forth into this manifested universe an immeasurably long time ago, and will eventually return to the one. Okay, now here, each divine spark is one and the same in essence and identity as the divine fire, but it has to evolve through the mineral kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, until eventually, at the end of its journey through the animal kingdom, it gains and acquires for itself a soul. So this is very much a theosophical perspective. Psychology, including transpersonal psychology, when I was studying it, didn't really go quite this far. So let's do links between the spirit, soul, and brain. So Theosophy says that the soul, unlike the spirit, is an individual thing. It is a permanent entity, and it is the self-conscious individuality which incarnates and reincarnates in the human kingdom. It is the true and immortal I of our being. And they say there is a human soul, which is the higher manus, the permanent reincarnating individuality, and a spiritual soul, which is the buddhi, the vehicle for radiation of the divine light from Atma, which in the picture was above. So the Atmic was here, shining its light all the way down here, shining, 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 the Atmic down to the buddhic, down to the higher manus and the lower manus. So the human soul in here and the spiritual soul here, according to this theosophy. So the brain, now we're going down to the physical here, the brain is simply a physical organ. And the mind, the higher manus up here, is the individual soul, which thinks and expresses itself through with the aid of the brain. So again, working its way down. And we have a different brain in each lifetime because we have a different physical body each lifetime. But the same reincarnating mind soul is the same each time. So the soul reincarnates, but the spirit does not. Souls are many, but spirit is essentially one. The soul is undivided, but the spirit is universal. So that's links between spirit, soul, and brain, according to Theosophy. Now let's look at streams of consciousness, and this is a little bit more psychological here, the flow of thoughts. And the term stream of consciousness, which is very popular within psychology, was used by William James, a psychologist, in 1893, a long time ago when psychology was first coming into being as a profession. So this stream of consciousness is a consciousness as an uninterrupted flow. So it's a river or a stream are the metaphors by which it is most naturally described. And it's a stream or a flow because one thought flows on to another, to another, to another. And that's like word association, what Freud would say. You know, talk about your mother and the words association, it just flows, an uninterrupted flow. And William James understood cosmic consciousness to be a collective consciousness. So this is a larger reservoir of consciousness, not individual, it's a larger reservoir of consciousness, which manifests itself in the minds of men and remains intact after the death of the individual. So it may retain traces of life history of an individual emanation. Okay, so here's William James, American philosopher and psychologist. And this is his quote. He said, "Our normal waking consciousness, rational consciousness as we call it, is but one special type of consciousness, whilst all about it, parted from it by the filmiest of screens, there lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different." So one of those entirely different ones, cosmic consciousness, and this may contain traces of life history of its individual emanation. So let's take a look at that. And this is from the point of view of Edgar Cayce. And he talked about the Akashic records and the blueprint for the soul. And he was talking about the Akashic records as a central storehouse. What he said is the Akashic records can be equated to the universe's supercomputer system. They are the central storehouse of all information for every individual who has ever lived upon the earth. And each person has a unique vibration, which acts like a fingerprint that is encoded onto the Akasha. And these records contain our every thought, our every deed, word, feeling, and intent. Whoops, I'm just going to go back. So this central storehouse of information of every individual, and each person has a unique vibration. Remember, we talk about, I can feel these other people's vibes, and that's a very energetic vibration, or that's a low vibration. So this is often talked about within consciousness as well, in states of consciousness. Okay, so the Akashic records of Edgar Cayce. So Edgar Cayce was a healer who accessed and read the Book of Life, the Akashic records. And Cayce stated that there were essentially two sources of information to help his client. And the first was the subconscious mind of the individual for whom he was giving the reading. And the second was the Akashic records. Now, I went to Edgar Cayce's institute, and this was in March 2013 because I was taking a higher hypnosis course, advanced hypnosis in transpersonal psychology and regression, things like that. So this was actually the bed that Edgar Cayce would lie on as he would go into higher states of consciousness and access the Akashic records and the subconscious mind of the client. So he had a very expanded mind, and mind with a small m and mind with a capital M to access all of that. And this is the Edgar Cayce Institute in Virginia, a huge library in there and a wellness center. And it was fabulous. I really enjoyed going there. So let's just do a little summary here. So this is the Logos and Spiritual Energy summary. So each person has a flow of spirit, energy, states, and layers of consciousness all through here. And may the force be with you. Open up to that force. Don't close off, because that is good energy and love and spiritual will and intuition and wisdom. So may the force be with you. Now we want to go to the summary and conclusions. And this is actually fairly long because it's got quite a bit in it as a summary. So first of all, I want to talk about connecting concepts. So and this is on consciousness, the different kinds of consciousness. So the personal consciousness, each individual's personal consciousness, we have a mind with memory and emotion. And this is generally waking ordinary consciousness. That's our personal consciousness. It's also dream states as well. And the subconscious, or the subconsciousness, that's where memories are stored away and usually available for surfacing to dwell on. Sometimes it's hard to get them to surface, and that's why sometimes we use hypnosis to take away the barriers. Now, Freud called the subconsciousness as the unconscious, whereas his student Jung called it the personal subconscious. So the words can sometimes be a bit confusing. Then the collective consciousness, this is the storehouse of all thoughts, memories of things, symbols, archetypes that happen to everyone. Another word would be the William James cosmic consciousness and the Akashic records, that consciousness. So super consciousness is the all. We're going up higher, higher, higher. This is more individual to more inclusive, the all and pure consciousness. Now, the ego mind, back down to the personal, the ego mind is the brain in action, the physical brain in action, and so therefore naturally involved in the affairs of pleasure and pain arising out of our sense experience, our physical sense experience. So the thoughts are the language of the brain. Emotion is the attitude of the thoughts, like, I like that idea, I dislike it, I'm happy about this. It's the attitude, I accept this, etc. And the feelings are the language of the body. So that's connecting these concepts regarding flow of consciousness. Now let's do the distinction between mind and consciousness. A person's mind is the operator of thoughts and ideas, and mind refers to the mental activities of the brain. And consciousness is the storehouse of thoughts. It's the Netflix screen. It's the supercomputer. And it's by using the mind that we have the ability to go to that supercomputer and bring thoughts into awareness, into normal, alert, waking consciousness. So mind is used to attend, focus, and rationalize on that within consciousness. Thus, mind accesses consciousness. The thoughts and contents within consciousness are forever changing due to the mind's activities of perceiving and so on. So it keeps on getting bigger and bigger and expanding every time we have a thought, an emotion, a memory that we are rethinking. That goes on to the Akashic records, to cosmic consciousness, and it's fingerprinted, so to speak, there. And while all levels of consciousness are potentially accessible to our minds, often our focal point of awareness tends to be on our normal, alert, waking consciousness and not on the higher levels, such as transpersonal, cosmic, or pure consciousness. Now, this is where I want to spend a little bit of time. I've got 2 slides like this. This one is taken from here, New Humanity Life, that explains levels of consciousness. And if we look on this side here, we've got the victim abuser consciousness, which is down here, self-empowerment, self-realization. So these are the different categories: self-realization consciousness, self-empowerment, and the victim abuser. They also put in here the dimension. They go to 12 dimensions, and the vibration and color. So color actually is vibration as well. So the 12th down to the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st. And here, so those are kind of categories, but victim abusive consciousness, they use the word consciousness there too, but these are the levels of consciousness. So let's start down here, the victim abuser consciousness. So this the person here that is anti-life, that is suicidal, has got very little awareness of higher dimensions of consciousness. So they are desperate, they are depressed, they are not into life at all. And then the next level up is destruction. So these can be the people that self-harm. They might not be successful at suicide, and let's hope not, but they self-harm. So they're at that destruction. So this is the victim abuser area. Abandonment is that sense that I'm not connected with anybody else or the source or the world or spirit. I feel abandoned. Above that is loss. I feel loss. I feel empty. I feel like no good. It's very much victim mode. And then we've got a level here, anxiety here, where it's a little bit better, a little bit easier, a little bit more filled with life, because this isn't filled with much life. This is filled with desperation and darkness. Here, this is the level of anxiety where you're not really thinking very well. It's quite jumbled and the emotions are all over the place. It's not a nice place to have, especially high anxiety or prolonged anxiety. And then this is need, where the person feels that they can't do it on their own very well. They are needy of something else or something more or others. And then irritation is getting less and less needy and less anxiety. And egoism is more about the mental processes and thinking and emotion. So it's kind of starting to think that and realize that you can use the mind in different ways. And this is also where cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, comes into it, rational, emotional, behavioral therapy. When you start to learn about how the mind and how the emotions can work in your favor and that you can change your life around, okay? Then we get up to more towards the self-empowerment category, and this is positivity. So we're starting to feel positive and optimistic. And with that, we start developing trust because we can see that some of this positivity is resulting in something good. And then we have the inner will. So we're starting to get into a little bit more the beginnings of spiritual versus the lower mind and moving more up to the higher mind, the higher manas, where we allowance. And if we can feel the good vibrations from the inner light, from the source, if we can allow that in, then we start to feel all the more self-empowered and empowered with the light of the source. And here rationality takes on a more clarity. The rationality would be more clear, and it would be more realistic, not irrational, but more rational. And again, the inner will and down here and the inner light. Now we're starting to go into self-realization, and they're calling this a new humanity consciousness. And the color here goes more from blue up to violet, etc. So this inner wisdom, we're now doing, getting into Buddhi and Atma, where we've got that inner wisdom and that inner love and that intuition, and really being able to enjoy it. So these subsume, well, from positivity up. This is kind of a little bit of a line here, where this is really negative down here. Whoops, sorry. This is more negative down here, and this is more positive. So this is, we get more and more inclusive to the higher states of consciousness up here. And so here they describe unity and presence. So this is like the presence, I am, and non-duality. And then the great void awareness. So again, the I am, divine love, supracausal truth, and full consciousness. So that is from levels of consciousness and relating it to these different categories: self-realization, self-empowerment, and victim abuser. Now, the next chart is from the tyranny of beliefs. Another way of saying tyranny is power, dominance, and authority of beliefs. We know that our mind and our thoughts and our beliefs can be very strong. So our beliefs can have an authority over us, even if we believe something that is not true. If we believe it to be true, but it actually isn't, your belief will say that it's true. And then there is confusion and difficulty. So let's look at this chart. So on this left-hand side, we've got levels of consciousness this way, and this is we've got lines of realization. These lines along here. We've got all that is spiritual, logical, and emotional. I'm just going to go over this. How can I say? It's sort of like a summary, and then I'll go into detail. And then we have over here the major shifts of context, paradigm shifts. So, and this is when we look at the mind, you see this blue line here, more and less. This is the influence of the ego of the mind here. So let's look at it from this right-hand side over here, superstition. So this is the cycle of fear and superstition, which may not be the truth. But if you believe it to be the truth, you walk under a ladder, you're going to have bad luck. You believe it to be the truth, likely that you will attract that, because like attracts like, and you're going to attract that superstition. Now, when you go through this transition line, this line of realization, and you go from beyond superstition to beliefs, this is the tyranny of mind. So this is not proper thinking, this is superstition, and this is starting to use the mind in a more coherent and rational way. And then we go through another transition line here. This is the line, this yellow line is the line of intuition, and we move up here. And this is discovery of the self. So this is the higher self. And this is more about knowingness. So we have down here superstition, transitioning into beliefs, and then the influence of the ego, realizing that you have a higher manas, you have an atmic and a buddhi, etc., and you transition up all the way. And if you pass this line of realization to the I am, the all that is. So that's a good part of the chart there. Now let's look at these parts here, the emotional. Now the emotional is often associated with the body and feelings, and often it's associated with the gut. And some of these emotions would be anger, entitlement, you owe it to me, gut feelings, well, you just owe it to me, and blame, self-righteousness. So these are a little bit more negative. This is more animalistic will. This is more negative down here. This is not very developed. We get further development the higher up we go. So this is more the misery in that. So you feel the misery, you feel the envy, you feel more the lower emotions down here. So this is the fear down here, moving upwards towards the love on the emotional. So this feeling here. So if we cross this transition line, the line of rationalization, to be able to be logical, and that's why they call this logical. So here we're using the mind, and this is more related to the head. So the body is more related to the gut, and this is more related to the head. And this is where we have a greater understanding. So this is using calculation, experimentation, physics, observation. We use math and we try to prove things, and medicine and reason, cause and effect. So this is where the mind is really developing more for experimentation, for creativity, to understand how things connect together, link together, and how the world works. So also it talks about economics and science, a little bit associated with that. When we go from the logical and past this transition line here, the line of intuition, then we're going into the spiritual. So we're adding spirituality as a way of knowing and using more the heart and spirit. So here, this chart looks at acceptance and beauty and joy and inspiration, spirit inspiration. That's how the word kind of comes about, like that. A peace, a thankfulness. And when we are feeling this in the heart and it flows down to the mind and the emotions, then we're really in a good state of being and a healthy state and a progressive and creative state and a peaceful state. So this is where they suggest there's unconditional love, humility, truth, forgiveness, and allowance. So if we go up to the next transition line, the line of realization, and you combine all of that together and use more of this, and not the lower emotions, you want the higher emotions. Then you come to the I am, the all that is. So if we look over here, this area here, levels of consciousness as well, is more animalistic will. And this is more like these feelings here, worry, jealousy, regret, and denial. You move beyond the animalistic will to the assumption of free will. And this assumption of free will is related to the mind and logical. And you look at economics and science and different forms of science so that we can learn to build and create a good life and a good lifestyle and a good world. So we've got the free will to think in that way and to act in that way. We are co-creators with Supreme Source, and we have free will to utilize our logical mind. Then passing through this line of intuition here, they talk about economic science and faith. So this faith is a bit like knowing and the truth, in my opinion. And this is like, thy will be done. To have faith, like the Logos, and to have faith in the Logos, that it is wisdom and love, and is moving into our hearts for the goodness of life. So to have faith of thy will be done. So devotion, and some people use prayer and meditation. And so we now are going up to love and the line of realization towards and into the I, or the I am. So this tyranny of beliefs, the more that we consider various theories and various figures such as this and some of the previous ones, and take out of it what makes sense to us, and experiment ourselves with looking at our thoughts and our emotions and working our way up with meditation and various spiritual practices to open up our heart, feel the spiritual, and feel that towards a better life and a better world. Okay, so recognizing enlightenment, and this is from David Godman, Be As You Are. And he said, if you are in an enlightened state, you can recognize others also in an enlightened state, otherwise not. So an enlightened state, this is also kind of indicating that you're not necessarily always in an enlightened state, but when you are, then you can recognize others that are too. He says that enlightened beings come in various forms, including as beggars. So we should not presume that the professor at university and the doctor at the hospital and these people that have been fortunate enough to sort of make it higher in the world compared to beggars that are more needy, they can also become enlightened. So it does not depend on your status in the world. Okay. And here I put this in. Before enlightenment, you work, play, you have relationships, you prepare food, etc. Before enlightenment, you just live, okay? And after enlightenment, you do exactly the same thing. You work, play, you have relationships, and you prepare food, but you know a lot more, you are wiser, you can see more, you're more patient, you feel more peace, you are more accepting. So your attitude and your way in life is better, but you still have to do all these things, okay? So the Zen proverb here was before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. So that was the end of the second one, higher consciousness and human being. Now it is the third one will be how to understand and interpret some of these spiritual, metaphysical, or transpersonal experiences, which are not the same as psychotic experiences. There are psychotic experiences, but they are different from these. And a lot of times the medical profession and the psychiatric and psychological profession did not distinguish between these. They lumped it all into there. And then the final one is the effects and transformations from spiritual experiences and the power of love. So I want to open this up for comments and questions now. And I will just end with this. May the positive energy of the universe surround you, flow through you, bring to you peace in your mind, love to your heart, and calm to your spirit. Okay.
I will now close the recording. Thank you so much, Dr. Goldin.
Thank you.